Imagine this, April 1945. The battle for Okinawa is raging. The air is thick with humidity and the smell of smoke. The earth, soaked by constant rain, turns into a clinging mud that pulls at your boots. In the distance, the rumble of artillery is a constant, dreadful reminder of the war that surrounds you. Inside a temporary American holding compound, a group of Japanese women officers stands in silence. Their uniforms, once a source of pride, are now torn, faded, and stained by weeks of relentless fighting and retreat. They look exhausted, defeated. Some clutch their sleeves, a small gesture, as if trying to hold on to the last shreds of the dignity they believe they've lost. They've been trained for this moment, not in what to do, but in what to expect. Surrender is the ultimate disgrace. Capture means humiliation, cruelty, and suffering. Their imperial doctrine has painted a horrifying picture of the enemy. They brace themselves for the worst. But then, something completely unexpected happens. From the other side of the compound, a group of American women approaches. They are members of the U.S. Army Nurse Corps and the Women's Army Corps. They aren't carrying weapons or interrogation tools. Instead, they're carrying folded bundles of clothing, clean dresses. Simple blouses, undergarments, shoes, nothing military about them. No insignia, no rank, just clothes. The American women begin to hand them out. No words are exchanged, no commands are given. It's a quiet, deliberate act. And as the clean, soft fabric is placed into their hands, several of the Japanese women begin to cry. Not loud, dramatic sobs, but silent, streaming tears. Why did this small act of kindness cause such a powerful reaction? To understand it, we have to look at the world these women came from. Wartime Japanese society was incredibly rigid. For the women who served in administrative, medical, and communications roles, life was defined by discipline, emotional restraint, and absolute loyalty to the state. Their uniforms were a symbol of honor and sacrifice. Their personal needs, their feelings, their very individuality all were to be suppressed. Weakness was a sin, and to receive charity, especially from the enemy, was considered profoundly shameful. The American military, on the other hand, had started to shift its policy by 1945. There was a growing emphasis on the humanitarian treatment of prisoners. Records from U.S. occupation and medical units confirmed that captured Japanese women were often given clean civilian clothing. The reason was partly practical. Their uniforms were often damaged and unsanitary. But it was also psychological. The war was coming to an end. For a lasting peace, the ideology that fueled the war had to end with it. For the Japanese women in that compound, the emotional contrast was staggering. They had steeled themselves for punishment, for indifference, for cruelty. What they received instead was empathy. The American women didn't lecture them. They didn't gloat or interrogate. They simply offered clothing, woman to woman, as equals. The most powerful symbol in this entire scene is the clean fabric. Imagine, after weeks or months of wearing a stiff, dirty, wool uniform stained with mud and the horrors of war, you're handed something soft, something clean. As their fingers touched the cotton, something inside these women, a wall they had built over years of indoctrination, just broke. The tears that followed weren't from fear or shame. They were from the sudden, overwhelming collapse of years of emotional suppression. U.S. Army medical reports from Okinawa describe this exact reaction. Observers noted how female Japanese captives would tremble, bow their heads, and sob quietly when given fresh clothing and basic hygiene supplies. One American nurse wrote in her journal that the women seemed completely unprepared for kindness, especially when it came from other women. This wasn't a sign of weakness, it was a sign of profound shock. For years, these officers had been taught a very specific narrative about their enemy. They were told that American society was immoral, decadent, and cruel. They were taught that American women, in particular, lacked discipline and dignity. But the reality unfolding right in front of them shattered that propaganda. The American women were orderly, calm, and respectful. They weren't asserting their power as victors. They were simply giving. This simple act triggered a transformation that went far beyond just a change of clothes. When they took off their uniforms, the Japanese women were no longer just symbols of the imperial state. They were individuals again. For many, this was a completely new experience. Their entire adult lives had been defined by duty and service. The simple act of putting on a dress became a profound act of psychological separation from the ideology that had consumed them. The clean clothes also became a symbol of something else: American abundance. Not in a wasteful, excessive way, but in a way that showed a society capable of waging a massive war while still preserving its humanity, its ability to care. In that moment, democracy wasn't about slogans or flags. It was expressed through a voluntary act of compassion. In the days that followed, something remarkable happened. Interrogation reports from the period note that after these exchanges, the women began to speak more openly. They were more cooperative. The loss of the uniform and the gift of civilian clothes had fundamentally altered how they saw themselves and their captors. One Japanese woman later recalled that the new clothes felt, too, soft for a defeated person. Another described the moment as unbearable, not because of shame, but because it exposed just how much emotional deprivation had been normalized in her life during the war. The transformation was subtle, but it was real and lasting. These women didn't just abandon their past beliefs overnight, but cracks began to appear in the rigid certainty they once had. The enemy was no longer a faceless, monstrous force. It was a complex society with people who held values that were completely different from everything they had been taught. This shift, this tiny change in perspective multiplied across thousands of similar encounters, was incredibly important for the post-war reconstruction of Japan. The redefinition of identity, especially for women, became a central part of rebuilding a society that was no longer driven by militarism. These small moments, which never made it into the headlines, were quietly reshaping perceptions in a way that no battlefield victory ever could. And in the end, it's the tears that matter most. They weren't just tears of defeat. They were tears of release. Tears that came when the heavy burden of representing an empire finally slipped away. They were tears born from the shocking realization that dignity could exist without a uniform, without rank, and without blind obedience. The clean fabric didn't erase the past. It didn't absolve anyone of responsibility for the war. But it offered something revolutionary in that moment, a glimpse of a shared humanity that had survived the destructive force of ideology. As the rain outside softened and the smoke over Okinawa began to drift away, the Japanese women folded their old stained uniforms for the very last time, and in their place they wore something lighter, not just in weight, but in meaning. Because sometimes the end of a war isn't marked by surrender papers or victory parades. Sometimes it's marked by a quiet, simple act of kindness that reveals a different, better way to live once the fighting finally stops. Thank you so much for watching. If this story moved you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more hidden stories from history. We'll see you next time.